you ever wanted to know the key to healing your gut? And did you also know your gut is the key to physical happiness? Well, we're going to talk about that today. I have a guest with me, and I can't wait to introduce him. First of all, I'm the biblical nutritionist. I'm a net reader, and I'm thrilled that you have joined us here today, either on YouTube or on podcast, however you choose to learn or however you choose to get your food of nutrition. That's what it's all about. I get to serve you God's recipe for excellent health, and I'm excited that you have joined us today. So let me just tell you about our guest, and I know you're going to enjoy this as much as I do, and plus, he's going to be a regular, so you're going to want to make sure you're subscribed down below. And don't forget to hit the bell next to subscribe so you get notified every time we post new videos and new podcasts. And hey, if you're in the mood, go ahead and like it as well. Today I have with me Dr. Matthew Sorrell. He's a board-certified chiropractic neurologist and fellow of the American College of Functional Neurology. He has a finished degree in clinical neuroscience, along with a fellowship training in electrodiagnostics, vestibular disorders, and rehabilitation. Also mild traumatic brain injury and concussion and nutrition. I don't know how you get it all in your day to do all of that, but I imagine your list of patients is quite long because so many people can benefit from what you have to teach us. He's in private practices in Kansas City, where he treats patients with chronic conditions related to the brain and the nerve-related dysfunction. That is quite an introduction because he is quite a specialist in his field, and because you matter to me, those of you who are watching today and listening on podcasts, I really want to make sure you can gain some knowledge from what he has to share. So Dr. Matt, welcome to this program.
Well, thank you. I always appreciate the ability to come take all that knowledge that I've garnered over the years. It's that desire to continue to learn, and that desire to learn usually comes because of my desire to serve. The most frustrating thing for me as a clinician is having patients come to me and seeing something that you've never seen before and not being able to help them as much as you would aspire to or hope to. Sometimes people think that as a clinician, as a doctor, that you have all the answers, and as anyone will tell you, I mean, every case is different, and there's always more to learn and more to know about the sciences as we develop, and research. I mean, more and more stuff comes out. So it's my love and passion. Luckily, it's an evolving thing, the science. So again, I get to continue to learn myself. So with that being said, I'm glad to share some of the knowledge and my experience with you and your audience.
Well, I appreciate that. And I have fallen in love with the science about the gut and the brain and the heart connection. It's totally where everyone needs to be. It's where they need to be learning and understanding, because I can so relate it to how God designed us. You know, you start with the heart and how important that is with your passions and your desires, and then your brain and your gut. And yet your gut is almost controlling everything. And I realized just for myself in the last, it's been about 9 months now, that just changing to these 7 steps that you're going to cover today, I am actually a happier person. And there's one person that really cares about this, and that's my husband. He is quite excited about this new happiness that I've been able to experience. And so he's very much in favor of everything I'm doing. And so I can't wait. So today we're going to learn the 7 steps to, having a healthy gut. Now, I know as we reviewed that these 7 steps, we're just going to be breezing over them. Each one is a book of its own. So be sure that all of you watching and listening, that you are tuned in and you're subscribed, because we're going to delve into more details in each one in future broadcasts. So Dr. Matt, get us started. Where do we start with these 7 steps?
Well, the first thing I always like to tell my patients, and hopefully your audience can take this as well, that a lot of these things, I mean, it's one of those things that you have the power to change your own, future destiny. Sometimes people sit there and think they are at fault of bad genes and some of these things. And sometimes that is the case. There can be a bad gene, but really genes are turned on and off by a lot of the environmental things that are around us. So a gene, as I'll explain to patients, is kind of like a light switch. And the different environmental signals around are the things that turn that gene on and cause it to express itself. And we can also turn that off when we know what we're looking at, what we need to do. So a lot of these things, they're simple, and a lot of these things are things that you can take action on yourself. Obviously, there's some detailed steps into each one of them. Sometimes there's a general lip service to something, but like you said, we'll get into each one of these as we go along. So without further ado, number one on the list, just something simple that's been the rage for a while. Again, we started learning about this in the research with people that have had mild traumatic head injuries, just because we see that it helps to clear up some of the junk and debris either in the brain and or in the gut. And this is called fasting. I tell people, it hasn't been around. It's probably the first and oldest form of a diet since, ancient biblical times, right? So something that people have done in honestly every major religion out there. I mean, I don't think everyone stumbled onto it by happen chance. So I think it's very commonsensical from that standpoint. We just have the research now that we've looked at it of what is actually happening. But there's different kinds of fasting, and we can talk about some of that in future topics. But there's the intermittent fast, which is kind of the rage right now. And I tell you, just a once every week or roughly 10 days is what the literature shows has a huge benefit. And when we look at our gut, it's the time that we just don't have stuff there that allows for the gut wall to heal up. So again, when you don't have the constant barrage of irritants or the pathogens that are floating around in there, that you can actually allow for that gut to heal up. Number two is looking at some of those pro-inflammatory foods. And what does that mean? Well, from a clinician standpoint, I will test and look at things. But from a general standpoint, a lot of those things tend to be in the grain aspect. So grains are anything of your wheat, your sometimes rice, so milk, soy, corn, and some foods that can become pro-inflammatory for somebody is even a healthy food. So keep that in mind. There's different ways of looking at it. Sometimes you can just do the simple remove and attempt to replace. But in this concept, it's get rid of some of those things that are causing the chronic inflammation. One other thing that causes massive inflammation in there is sleep. So if we had one more reason to sleep and or shut down the technology late there at night, and again, it's the fact that we need to have that ability to have good healing and recovery. When we sleep, there's a lot of other things going on besides just we're shut off and shut down, so to speak. But when we have stress hormones that elevate in the body, that's going to cause breakdown of that endothelial lining. That's the barrier that makes up the gut wall. And with that, it will cause it to open up and cause issues within the GI tract. Another general thing, again, that any and everyone can always go do, it's movement. Movement is key to life. So when we look at why we have a brain, when we look at it from a purely science standpoint, the reason we have a brain is because we need to move. There's trees and plants that are alive, but they don't move and they don't have a central nervous system like we do. Therefore, movement is completely dependent upon having a brain. And the fact that we do all these wonderful things, whether it's move our tongue, move our eyes, move our body, and or looking at the viscera like our intestines and gut, it is movement as well. And so when we have good activation of our whole body, that has good effects into our brain, and then that has good effects down a special nerve called the vagus nerve. That vagus nerve is what allows for good activation of the muscles that make up the smooth muscle that form your intestines and allow for good motility. And then the few other concepts of movement are going to be looking at, do you have an active lifestyle and or do you exercise? Because we really look at people in three categories now. You have the inactive sedentary person who does nothing all day long. He's a desk jockey. And then you have the person who's got the exercise routine, but he's still a desk jockey. And then you have finally the third person who's active lifestyle throughout the day. And also the guy who goes and does the hour, 5 times a week exercise. So there's actually three categories that we look at people. And there's a difference when we look at what happens to their blood chemistry. So the into that is really be the more active person throughout your day with the exercise on top of it, because that's a better outcome. Most people who've ever had any gut issues, I mean, talking about bone broth and glutamine, aren't revolutionary. They are very powerful things to help heal the gut wall. If people are familiar with like the GAPS diet, the GAPS diet is one of those things that is very, very beneficial. Part of it has to do with the fact that they're just removing all the foods for a period of time. They're using the bone broth to heal the gut wall. There's different types of amino acids and the things that help to heal the endothelial cells in the lumen of the gut, which is great. Glutamine as well, it helps to heal up the gut wall. Those are wonderful, easy, simple things. And just a side note for those that have not heard anything about bone broth, that is not the stuff you can go to the grocery store typically and buy. Bone broth there is some weird, commercialized thing that's made. So real bone broth is something really you have to make, or if you do have a local store that does sell it, just make sure it's prepared with real stuff in it. And now the next couple things I want to speak about are things that people are familiar with regards to probiotics, and those are the bacteria. But there's the prebiotic material, which is the plant fibers, and also then the short chain fatty acids. So short chain fatty acids are the postbiotic. So when we look at trying to heal the gut, we want to make sure we have good amounts of these short chain fatty acids. These short chain fatty acids are really the fuel that fuel the bacteria to have greater levels of diversity. And these short chain fatty acids are the end products of the bacteria that you already have that are eating up the plant fibers. And these come in the form of butyrate, acetate, and propionate. And these are the three that are most common. Again, there's different ratios that you need of them, but that is probably the biggest thing in the last maybe 5 to 7 years that has been really coming to, that has a huge effect. And we'll definitely talk a lot more about that. And lastly, the prebiotic material, which is the diversity being king of all things. You want to change up the diet. Again, most Americans tend to stick to maybe 20 food groups, which is crazy to think of, that they can narrow their diet to such a narrow selection of food. But really, we want to change things. So even if you are a healthy person, I challenge you to go out and buy some of those weird vegetables that you haven't eaten. And if you've eaten everything in your local grocery store, go down to the Korean grocery store and find some of those weird mutant looking vegetables that you've never seen before or can't pronounce, and try some of those things out, because different plant fibers grow different bacteria in the gut are going to allow for greater levels of diversity, which lead to greater health.
Okay, that's an amazing list of to-dos. So let's go back and let's just revisit a few of them. I noticed the first three, which was fasting and removing inflammatory foods and sleep. Actually, those are all happening at the same time, because God instilled for us to sleep. He instilled for us to rest every night. And of course, if you're getting up in the middle of the night and eating, that's just a number one, okay, change that habit immediately. And then removing the inflammatory foods. So you talked about wheat, but most people know I teach healthy bread making. And so I have noticed that when I can get people off of that store-bought and restaurant food, restaurant breads, yeah, we have an amazing gut turnaround. But even when I make bread myself, I have to buy the grains that are certified, no chemicals. And then I can actually use the grains. And I tend to go more towards the spelt and the kamut and the amaranth, just because they are not as altered, as we say in what I teach. So just wrapping that up. So yeah, I totally agree with you on the fasting. I mean, if you can stop eating at, let's say, 7 o'clock at night, and then don't eat again until even just 8 o'clock in the morning, that's a 13-hour fast. And that gives your body just a chance to say, finally, she stopped eating, finally we can clean up her mess, And I think that's what people need to realize, instead of snacking up till bedtime and then starting the morning with a donut. that just causes havoc for your day. So just to kind of put this into some practical steps, what do you think about that? The 7 p.m., just as a starting point for people, 7 to 8.
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, I think what we see is when you decrease the amount of time that your gut is having to constantly fuel it or be dealing with the constant fuel coming in the form of fats and carbohydrates and proteins is definitely a good thing. I think there was a fad diet about 20 years ago called the Body for Life, if I can recollect. And their idea was you want to constantly give yourself food every 2.5 to 3 hours.
Yeah, that was a killer.
Yes, that was not a great diet from that standpoint. Now, there are people, again, I'm a clinician, so I diagnose things, that sometimes they have hypoglycemia, and there's a reason to actually give somebody small amounts of food, because if their gut's not working well, because they have poor brain integrity to activate the gut and stabilize blood sugar, I need to give people small amounts of meals because they can't digest large volumes of food. So there's a clinical, rational reason to do different things. But generally speaking, saying you're overtly healthy, I would say try to limit your food consumption into a more narrow window and allow for a 12 to 14 hour fast period. So the whole don't eat past 7, 8 o'clock at night, unless there's some medical condition that requires that you have something, so that you don't end up with insomnia. But otherwise, beyond that, I would definitely say that's a great step forward.
Great. Now, this is definitely going to be another broadcast. We're going to be talking about fasting in a lot more detail and what all happens in your body when you fast. But what you need to understand is that God called a fast. And there are many times fasting has been put into the different seasons and the different festivals. So we are definitely going to hit this again, and probably more than once, because it's just so important to understand. And because the world has got caught up in it, we need to understand what is the biblical significance of it. And then that takes us straight into sleep. We sleep better when we're not still digesting a meal that we finished. And, this really hits home at like New Year's Eve parties and things like that. Or when I go on a cruise, it's all about eating at 8 o'clock. And I'm like, oh, I have a hard time sleeping when I've just eaten. And it's like, oh, I hate this. And so we really need that sleep to renew ourselves so the next day can be an amazing day. So definitely. And when we are fasting, we are removing the inflammatory foods. It's just a natural process. It happens. And so just wanted to those first three, and then movement. I like how you wrap that up. And so so you mentioned the 3 different groups of people. Yeah, I have family members in every single group, and it's just, you kind of get into a habit. And so I would say to get started, just start adding in 10 minutes. When my husband has very stressful days and he's like, I'm too tired to exercise, I try to encourage him, just go get up on the bike. We have like one of those spin class bikes. And I said, just do 10 minutes. Even just 10 minutes will change your cellular chemistry. I mean, it's amazing. So that's another video we're going to do again. So make sure you're subscribed down below. And then you went into the bone broth. Yeah, that's another video we're going to have, is showing you how to make real bone broth. And I love making my own because I save a lot of money and I know how I made it. And I know I get all of the nutrition instead of what someone else thinks I should have. And you're right, just buying, vegetable broth or beef broth or chicken broth in the grocery store is not a health promoting food. It's really just a flavored water is really all it is. And that's all you're getting, whether it's organic or non-organic. It's just flavored water. So you really need to learn to make it yourself. And that way you take charge of your own health. And then you went into the short chain fatty acids and the prebiotics and probiotics. And you talked about fiber. And everyone who's watched my YouTube videos know I am the queen of fiber. Every food I talk about is like, hey, this has fiber in it. So I am totally with you. And I also love the fact that you mentioned diversity of foods. You were so right. We eat 20 foods and that's it. My husband grew up on green beans and corn, and those were his vegetables. And my dad liked to farm, so we had different vegetables. So we had a little bit more variety. But yeah, you're so right. And so I would encourage everyone watching this week to go get one new vegetable for their diet. Something you haven't tried before, or maybe it's been 10 years since you've had it. I want to encourage you to do one new food. And if you're in our private group, we're going to have a vegetable challenge where every day for 30 days, you have to try a new vegetable. I don't know if we can find 30 vegetables, but we're going to look for it. And just to recognize how that can totally change your health. So what do you think about those ideas?
I like it. I just would add the one thing, try to find something seasonal as well.
Yes,
I think
that's
there's a
good.
huge thing with regards to there's a season for everything. And with regards to our eating habits, our movement habits, sometimes people like to just get in this routine of eating the same thing, exercising the same exact way. And again, I think when we look at the change of the seasons, different foods are there for us. And using the things that are at our disposal, I think are better than trying to import, some banana from Chile around this time of year and getting that into you.
That's a really good point. And God made everything for a season, for a purpose, and it just helps us to recognize the goodness that He is. Okay, so this wraps up today, the 7 steps to a healthy gut. Although all we did was open 7 doors to get you interested in more information. But I hope we've given you some good takeaways, some good starting points that you can say, hey, I'm just going to take one thing from this broadcast and I'm going to make one change. And if you do, that's what matters. So Dr. Matt, and we call him Dr. Matt because there's 4 doctors in his family. So if you say Dr. Sorrell in Kansas City, well, I don't know if they're all in Kansas City, but you don't know which one you're going to get. So we're going to call you Dr. Matt on our show.
That is fine. That's what I'm used to going by.
All right. So this is Dr. Matt Sorrell. We're going to put a link to his website down below so you can connect with him and, get more information about that. Especially if you live in the Kansas City area, you definitely want to check him out and see about having him be your clinical physician. So I'm Annette Reeder, the biblical nutritionist, and I am so excited that you decided to share this time with us and to join us to learn more about how God created you, how God's foods are going to help bring healing, and most importantly, to understand is that God loves you. He created you for a purpose. So don't forget to hit the like button so we know exactly that we're giving you the content you're looking for. If there's a topic that we haven't covered or you're like, hey, I really want you to answer this question, put it in the comments down below. I can't wait to read what you say. And like I said, subscribe to this channel. I'm Annette Reeder, the biblical nutritionist. And until next time.